So this video is pretty much why you should do debating. If you're starting out and you don't know if you should commit, or if you're still picking an organization, a student like society or whatever, this kind of talks about what you should expect. And I don't hope to convince you to debate with this video. I just want to make sure that you're making the most informed decision about debating before you get into it. So debating, I think it's a very rewarding activity, and we'll tackle some of the things that make it very rewarding, but also it's very taxing. And I think you should probably know what you're getting yourself into. I think debating might promise a lot, but it also will take a lot. And I do think it's one of the things where you really get what you put in. So there are a lot of great things about debating, and many reasons I've done it for so long. First is a lot of people will say they want to do debating because they will improve at public speaking. And I think this is like 100% accurate. My public speaking skills before and after debating have changed like fundamentally. And I think it's a lot easier to speak in many different ways. So I think number one, it helps you logically organize your thoughts. And there are a lot of times where you have a lot of things you want to say, but you don't really know how to structure them, how to go about them, how to sequence them. And I think debating is honestly all about that. It helps you build an intuition for organizing the many different ideas in your head, as well as present them in a manner that everyone can understand. I think that's one of the most important skills you learn from debating. Second is it helps you speak with a very small amount of time to prepare. The most standard debating format is the British parliamentary format, and that gives you about 15 minutes to prepare. At the start, it's honestly a very difficult adjustment, but once you get used to it, you'll realize that it's a lot of time, and that when you are called to do some kind of impromptu speech, if you want to recite in class, or anything like that, you realize that you can do so much kinds of like preparation in the very short amount of time. Third is I think it helps with managing speech anxiety. And I think it's important to manage this particular expectation because I know a lot of people are afraid of public speaking and they think that once they debate, that fear will all go away. And I don't think that's true. A lot of the best debaters that I know are people who still kind of have speech anxiety in some way or some form. But I think what debating helps you with is managing that speech anxiety. So understanding what are the things that might help you have a clear mind once you start speaking in front of a crowd. What are the like particular techniques and tricks you can like help yourself with in order to be very comfortable in front of a lot of people. Sometimes it will just completely go away for other people, but sometimes it's instead about how do you best manage this kind of fear that you might have right now. The last thing is the precision of language. I think what debating is very good for is being able to learn how to specifically use words in ways that you intend. Meaning, I think there are times when people will use too big a word to sound very eloquent, when that might not be the best word. But on the other hand, a lot of people will use too vague a word, too simple a word that might not fully capture the complexity of what you're trying to convey. And I think the precision of language helps you strike that middle ground a lot of the time, being both understandable, but at the same time not losing the nuance of what you want to tell people. And debating is all about that. There's a lot of jargon that I think both helps with being more specific, but at the same time can kind of prevent you from being more specific. And I think a lot of the best debaters will know when to use certain words, when to discuss certain concepts, etc. Last thing, and I think an underrated thing about debating is that it really helps you write. My essays, especially ones that require like logic, fact, etc., are much better after I have done a lot of debating. Because skills like logically organizing your thoughts or just knowing a lot more about the world will translate to the way in which you write as well, not just the way you speak. And that's the second thing, just knowing more about the world. So in debate, you can have so many different topics. You can go talk about religion, sports, philosophy, etc. And that kind of forces you to learn about these things, especially in formats where you're not allowed to Google things. So most debate tournaments that I go to don't allow research or Google in the middle of preparation time. And thus, a lot of that prep work has to be done in terms of being regularly updated on the news, actively reading through different kinds of materials before you do tournaments. And I think that's cool just because there are a lot of things that you might not realize you're interested in until you are exposed to them. And if you're someone that's in high school and thinking about debating, honestly, I think that'll help inform what major you might take on, especially because debating, I think, covers a lot of fields of study that will probably be available in terms of college coursework. So I almost took economics just because I've debated a bunch of economics motions and I always found them very fun. That could apply to politics, science, technology, etc. I think it's also good in that it forces you to learn about things you might not be initially interested in, not just in terms of you were never exposed to it, but things that you might not have thought you'd ever be into. So I don't know, maybe different kinds of sports, perhaps regions of the world that you might not have realized you really would like to know more about the context and culture of. Debating might force you to learn a bit more about them. Third is the community, and this is one that honestly will really stay with you long after you've done debating. It's a great way to meet new people, so you can get very close to your organization, your society, especially as you do training, if you go to tournaments, etc. But second is that it helps you meet a lot of people from other schools that you might not have met otherwise. So going to tournaments is honestly a really good experience, especially now where I feel debating has become very global, and you can meet people from parts of the world despite maybe having never traveled to them, but still getting to become friends and learning more about them. I think because it's a competitive thing, it's sometimes not good for the community aspect. But I'd say most of the time, and an overwhelming majority of the time, the like love for the activity is then bringing the community together. As cheesy as it sounds, honestly, will always trump the competitive, cutthroat nature of it, which I don't think is even that cutthroat at all. Competition and self improvement. So I'm a very competitive person, and I find winning to be very fun. And if you allow yourself to, you'll remember the wins a lot more than the losses. But more than that, I think progression is very fun. I think when you enter debating, you can't expect that your first few tournaments you're winning everything. But what you will notice, and I think this is true for most, if not all people, there's definitely an active progression that's occurring. Because debating has a lot of metrics. They will give you scores for speeches, they will tell you if you took a first, a second, if you won, if you lost. And you'll realize that over time you're winning more, you're speaking, or rather your scores are higher, and thus seeing yourself improve, I think, is a very fulfilling and rewarding experience. And more than the result, it's very nice to see how far you've come. There are a few things to keep in mind though, and again, I'm not sharing this because I want to dissuade people from debating. I just think that people should be fully aware of what they're getting into. So debating is very time consuming, and as with most things, you get as much as you put in. So you have to really know if you're enjoying this and if it's worth the time you're putting in. Because there are a lot of other worthwhile hobbies or pursuits that I've seen debaters do very well in, because they've given up or sacrificed their debating in order to pursue other things. So knowing that it comes at a cost, and knowing that you should be making good decisions, like not, like sacrificing your academics for debating, I think it is a very important thing to be aware of. It's also very emotionally exhausting because I think unlike other hobbies, it's tied to a lot of things. It's tied to your intelligence, your work ethic, and other very personal qualities. And so losing can feel worse when you think it makes you stupid or if it makes you like not hardworking enough, for example. And so you kind of have to shield yourself against these kinds of thoughts because honestly, no matter how great debaters can be, they will lose and they will lose very tough losses or take very tough losses. It's also a very subjective activity. So unlike other like sports, for example, where you have scores that are easily determined, you have judges that rate speakers and speakers who rate judges. And that can be a very imperfect way of determining who wins, who loses, who's good, who's bad. And that can be additionally difficult because in as much as I love the debating community, there are definitely still issues of racism, sexism, language biases, and many more that would affect how objective, in a sense, that decision could be. More than that, I think competition can put people at odds at times, and you have to be very healthy with how you view competition. And the people around you should view competition in a very healthy manner as well, in order to ensure that it doesn't get emotionally exhausting. It's also a bit of an anxiety inducing activity. So you have a very short preparation time, you will speak in front of big audiences. There will be times, or many people actually, who will get over it, in the sense that they will get used to it, they won't be as scared. But there will be times when that fear will come up, or you will panic because 15 minutes, 30 minutes is not a lot of time. Those are the standard amounts of time you have to prepare. And there are many structures in debating that make it even more nerve wracking. So sometimes you have to wait a very long time before you get a result, and you're worried about it the whole way. There will be rounds where you might not know the results at all until the very next day. Those are silent rounds. And there's just the uncertainty of you qualifying to the elimination rounds. So you oftentimes need to get a certain number of points to qualify to the next set of rounds when you do a debate tournament, and not making it is very scary. There's also a lot of pressure if you're representing your school, your country, or other like institutions. And it's often important to remember that you should, know that you're debating for yourself, and forgetting all these other aspects and factors into it. So it's pressure, and some people will love this pressure. Some people can manage and ignore this pressure if necessary. But you should know that this pressure exists, and it's not the easiest thing. So it's a question of should you still do it? And I don't intend to push people to say yes, and debating is good for all people. I do think some level of debating is good for all people. I do think debating should be actively integrated into things like English curriculums, for example. But I don't think actively, competitively debating is always a good thing. And you should probably know yourself, see if you can commit to it, see if you can work hard enough for it, and at the same time, if you can manage all the things that come with it. Because I do still think it's a very rewarding activity. And if you think that the rewards are going to outweigh the costs, then definitely I think debating is a worthwhile thing to still do. That's all, and we'll get into more technical details about debating in the coming videos. This is just more a bit like feelings, vibes kind of thing.